Hey everybody, and welcome to this keynote panel looking forward Apache Iceberg and the Iceberg ecosystem. We have some amazing panelists, and I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to these amazing, panelists. Okay, so first off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call on each of you to quickly introduce yourself. So I'll start off with Robert Stoop.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Robert. Thanks, Alex, for having me. I'm working for Dremio as a software engineer and mostly on open source NERSI, and of course, obviously, all the related projects like Apache Iceberg.
Okay, Daniel Weeks.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan, and I am co-creator of Apache Iceberg and co-founder and CTO at Tabular.
Casey Karst.
Hi everybody, I'm Casey. I'm a principal product manager at Dremio, focusing on Apache Iceberg, data ingestion, and everything about data.
Paul Megan.
Hey everyone, I'm Paul. I lead product management for Amazon S3 and Glacier at AWS.
Awesome. Now, before we have a really exciting conversation about Apache, not just Apache Iceberg itself, but about the future of Apache Iceberg, what I want to do is make you aware of a really amazing event that's coming up, and that is the Apache Iceberg Summit 2024, the first event of its kind being organized by Tabular and Dremio. You can scan this QR code on the screen now to go register for the event, which will be held on May 14th and 15th, with a variety of talks getting into the technical depths of Apache Iceberg, and it's going to be done virtually online so you can see it from wherever you're at. But now let's begin with our show. Okay, so now for the first question, the question is, what new features, functionality, or spec changes are you most excited about in the core Apache Iceberg project? So let's begin with Robert Stoop.
Yeah, thank you. Most excited actually. I'm about the direction that Iceberg takes with using REST actually. And I'm particularly happy about the announcement that NERSI will implement Iceberg's REST API. So that means whatever language you're using, whether it's Java, Scala, or Rust, or Python, you can just use the appropriate Iceberg client and just use it with NERSI. And yeah, we will publish a release of a beta very soon, and it's generally available a short time after, and obviously also in Dremio.
Awesome. Daniel Weeks?
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different direction. I'm going to talk a little bit about the next spec release for Iceberg. And we've really started to gather a lot of ideas about what we want to include in there. And so far, many of them are kind of convenience features, things that are slightly rough edges within Iceberg, like type promotion, things that people commonly run into. And because Iceberg is so strict about schema, evolution, correctness, and the guarantees that it provides, it actually makes it a little difficult in certain situations when your data is evolving to be able to manage that effectively and not having to go back and rewrite anything. So type promotion is a big one. Another area is actually new data types. I'm personally very interested in a binary JSON representation or a generalized JSON representation, because that's something that a lot of engines have to deal with on a regular basis. Having an optimized representation for that, where people can both store and retrieve values from JSON payloads, is incredibly useful, because despite all of the great schematization and everything, there's a lot of JSON out there still. And sometimes that's what you need to focus on. And the performance improvements that we can add there would be really beneficial to the ecosystem as a whole. Beyond that, there's a lot of other things in the spec that we're looking forward to helping in terms of managing Iceberg tables, like location ownership, because a big part of managing Iceberg is the maintenance aspect of it. And I think that there's a lot that's going to go into it. So I'm really excited about the spec v3, and we are collecting different ideas, and there's still ongoing discussion about what's actually going to be included.
Oh, I love that. Definitely, schema updates are always really exciting, because schemas can take on all sorts of shapes and sizes. So I very much agree with that. Casey, tell me a little bit what's on your mind.
Yeah, so I'm going to take it yet again, I think, a slightly different direction. As a product manager, the thing I'm really excited about is customer adoption and usage of Iceberg. And if we look at the trend of Iceberg and where we're going to be in the next 6 months, next year, it's just becoming the de facto choice. And that to me is an amazing set of customer value. So above and beyond the features, we're sitting on technical gold right now. Iceberg's really good right now today. And so just having more customers understand that and start to evaluate it and try it, I think is going to be hugely beneficial as far as the ecosystem and just the number of customers using this. So going from the customer side and then technical, I think the Kafka Connect project that's coming actually out of Tabular, and Dremio just tested it, that thing is going to be amazing. We have customers banging on our door saying we want Kafka to write to Iceberg, and we want that to be part of the spec. And that is just going to be an amazing amount of value for the ecosystem.
Yes, no, Kafka is definitely exciting, and definitely streaming is definitely an important story going forward. Paul, what's on your mind?
I'm pretty excited about REST catalogs. In fact, we have like every big customer that I talk to, it feels like, is sort of like on the precipice of trying to get to a REST catalog. I think that's going to be just such a huge simplifier for everyone. That API just makes a ton of sense. And so, I think that is about to really break through across a bunch of big Iceberg implementations, and that flywheel will just get going on the REST catalog. So I'm pretty excited about that. That API just makes so much sense.
Got it. No, super agree on that. And then because the REST catalog kind of came up a few times here, Daniel, I would just like to kind of follow up with you real quick to just give a quick summary of what is the REST catalog and what is this spec to the audience.
Yeah, the way that I like to talk about the REST catalog is that like in comparison to what the Iceberg table specification is, the table spec kind of defines how do you lay out data, how do you evolve it, but the REST catalog is more about how do you access that data. And so it's a specification that everybody can share in terms of how do we address data, how do we get access to it. And so the catalog, at the simplest level is like, I've got some logical name, geo country that you're looking up, and how do you identify where the actual underlying Iceberg data is? And that's what the REST catalog is providing.
Awesome. Now let's move on to our second question. You are all involved in projects that extend the reach of the Apache Iceberg system. So in this case, now looking sort of not just at Apache Iceberg itself, but sort of the things around Apache Iceberg. What are the exciting things that you look forward to in the projects that you're working on? And we'll start with Robert.
Yeah, so I mean, generally speaking, yes, of course, Nessie with Iceberg REST, it is being released soon. But let me elaborate a little bit. And in my experience, I've been working on databases a lot, and those were basically optimized for single-digit milliseconds and sometimes sub-millisecond response times. I think that's something that we all know is really extremely hard to do in today's data lakes. And I love to improve all the things that have performance of all these regions, right, against data lakes much better. Maybe becoming close to these goals, but maybe not. But so what I really love to do is getting too close to that, obviously from the Nessie side.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Daniel Weeks?
Yeah, so when I look at the kind of like the projects around the ecosystem, I think in terms of kind of the implementations of the Iceberg spec, and we're seeing that there's a broad range of language support that's coming out. We've been working on the Python implementation for quite a while, and I think that that's really going to expand adoption of Iceberg because the initial implementations that rely on heavier frameworks and things like that, there's a lot to set up, and it's a lot to get people kind of involved with using Iceberg. But Python is such a low bar in order to just like spin up a Python process and start working with Iceberg tables. And I think it also helps us reach into other communities that haven't been part of the like traditional big data ecosystem. So, ML, data science, things like that, where you're using libraries that are typically in Python or some, other scientific language. Getting access to those is really important to kind of bring these ecosystems of like big data and machine learning, AI, data science all together. So I'm really excited to see like the Python project, a lot of movement on the Rust side. That'll be really interesting to see where that project goes. And, the Go implementations for people who are working in that ecosystem. So I think just kind of rounding out who has access to Iceberg data and who can leverage that, I think is a really important thing. So that's what I think about when I think about like the reach of the project and what's going on around the ecosystem.
100%. I definitely was jumping for joy when I heard that PyIceberg had write support. So, really exciting times. But Casey, what have you been looking forward to?
Yeah, so a bunch of people talked about the REST catalog, but I do see that here as like the extension point for, as Daniel was just saying, for AI ML having multiple personas interact with this same data set and kind of democratize that access across personas, workloads, but have a common interface. So I see that as like the most important thing for us to now standardize on. We have the data on the lake, right? We have the table format. So we're just moving up those layers of abstraction. And then once we nail that, then it's really a persona-driven kind of experiences that we can hone in on as an ecosystem so that data analysts get the experience that they're looking for, data engineers get the experience they're looking for, and then AI ML experts can get the experience they're looking for. So it's really just kind of, to me, moving up the abstraction tiers and then looking forward, how do we start to specialize experiences by language, by different products connecting to the same underlying data and interfaces via the catalog.
Cool. Just kind of tug on that, just because I want to kind of point out the cool sort of things that are coming up with Iceberg in a sense. Like, are there, being from Dremio, are there any really cool sort of Iceberg features that you'd like to highlight that are coming?
Yeah, so one thing that we're looking, something that we built at Dremio is partition stats. And so it sounds like a little subtle thing, right? So Iceberg by default has stats at the file level, but we implemented them at the table and at the partition level. And so what that allows you to do is other query engines to create better plans at a higher level of abstraction. And it's something that we built as a performance optimization. We saw amazing results. We said, okay, like everyone should get this and it should just be part of the spec. So it is something that we're pushing down. And I think as more technology companies start to implement Iceberg, we're going to see these little optimizations across the ecosystem just get pushed into the standard. And that's going to be hugely valuable for everyone. And that is the value of open standards, right? Is everybody can benefit from these things. So I think that's one of the small little things that may be subtle, but I'm super excited to see that land as part of the spec.
Cool. Paul, so how are things with you, far as like AWS and Iceberg and the things that people can look forward to in the AWS platform?
Sure. First, let me just plus one the Python thing. Like, I've talked to a bunch of customers. I think what will happen here, not only will you have folks like adopting Iceberg into sort of adjacent workloads outside of the data lake, but also I think you'll just get Iceberg popping up in like small little islands where someone just wants to query Parquet. You know what I mean? As like some function in an app somewhere, and like just making that, lowering the barrier to entry to enable those sort of smaller use cases, I think is like really powerful. That's gonna like result in a pretty long tail. But from AWS, from my side, these workloads are pretty significant workload for us, right? And they have like somewhat unique access patterns compared to some of the big workloads that have really grown on S3 over the course of our history. And so for us, we spend a lot of time sitting with customers and kind of working backwards from what they tell us is important. And, given sort of the semi-unique access patterns that Iceberg drives, we spent a lot of time over the last 12 to 18 months really thinking about storage performance for Iceberg queries, storage performance for Parquet, since many of these tables that is sort of the language that we kind of end up speaking with one another. And so that's where we've been focused, and that's where we're kind of hard at work right now, is like figuring out like how can we optimize the storage for this workload in particular to just make Iceberg go faster and cheaper.
Pretty awesome. Love seeing that there's all sorts of work being done at sort of every level of the stack to make an Iceberg Lakehouse just such an amazing option. But let's move on to our third question. Now, in this question, what do you think will be the biggest catalyst for making it even easier to get started with Apache Iceberg in the future? I have a feeling that I know what many of you are going to say based on some of the previous responses, but let's go for it. Robert, go for it.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's not just one catalyst. It's basically two things, in my opinion. And the first thing, and I think the most important one, is it must be extremely easy to get started with data and to work with Iceberg. And second, it must really just work, like every time and everywhere you use it. So things like client configuration, you just don't want to spend time configuring all these 1,000 knobs and settings and such. So that's where obviously the REST catalog helps a lot. And ideally, you just open your browser and start working. So, and no cryptic error messages, or if there are actionable ones, reproducible queries, know often when and how often you started, data being consistent across all the tables and views. I mean, do you want your account balance and your account bookings be inconsistent? It doesn't sound right. And yeah, I mean, lightning fast to do read and write operation, no downtime, obviously. But also, and last but not least, is respecting all the regulations and legal requirements like legal holds, GDPR, CCPA, zero trust, obviously. Yeah, I think that's these are the things that are really important.
Got it. I always love it when things just work, and I think that's a great thing to be working towards. Daniel, what kind of catalyst do you see coming?
Well, it's going to sound a little bit like an echo, but REST catalog and again, like Python, I think are things that really ease adoption. And the way that we like to think about it is, accessibility to data is the most important thing now. The change to really being able to leverage object stores, cloud storage, things that are somewhat globally referenceable means that you have the opportunity to bring technologies wherever they happen to be and address data without having to move it around. And so the REST, catalog, of course, is one approach to that. There's others, but the reality is once you can address that data, you can bring the right tool for the right problem. And we're seeing more and more across companies just through different teams, acquisitions, like all the different things that are happening at these large companies. You get different tool sets, and you don't want to have to like give up all of that in order to work with your data. Or the alternative, hire a bunch of people to do nothing but like ship data around. So this is like a really transformative change. And I think the more that the different engine providers learn how to address Iceberg data where it happens to land or where it happens to exist, just means that it's going to be easier and easier to use different tools. And I really see that as like the crux of like where we're headed in terms of the next generation of data processing in cloud-based environments.
Awesome, 100%. Casey, so what kind of catalysts do you see in the near term?
I think the biggest thing is really just going to be customer adoption and value. And we're already seeing we're moving out of the early adopters in this space. And so I think as we get more case studies, as we get more successful customers, as we get more technology partners working on the same ecosystem, like the flywheel starting to spin, it just needs a little bit of time. And I think with that, a simplification of how we describe Iceberg to folks. If you talk to kind of end users or business users, if we get into the technical details, they get kind of lost. And I think just saying like it's a table and your data's here and that's wonderful, and really focus on the why and the value that it delivers, while keeping the technical training for the folks who really want to dive deep into the technology. I think that's the big thing that we're going to see out, but that'll come with mainstream adoption of Iceberg. And so it's a natural process that we're going on. But I firmly believe that we're on really solid foundations here with what we've built today. The V3 spec's only going to make it better. And so it's really just kind of helping customers get to that value point where they're seeing success, where they've consolidated their data, where they can talk to other pieces or islands of Iceberg data with REST catalogs, and that becomes a standard. I think we're just going to see an explosion of adoption here of Iceberg. So we're on the right track. I think we just need a little time for that adoption flywheel to start spinning faster, and super exciting to see what that becomes.
Okay, Paul?
I have two. The first is that I think the first is the ecosystem that's forming around Iceberg. There's a network effect there that there's just a tremendous amount of value as the ecosystem expands and becomes more valuable and provides, fits into more nooks and crannies in terms of customer needs. And so that ecosystem expansion, I think it's still early on, frankly. Like we're still early on that, and there's a lot more usability, innovative use cases. There's a lot tooling to go on the ecosystem around Iceberg. I firmly believe that. And then the second one that I would flag is from where I sit, is enterprise adoption. And enterprise adoption brings with it a whole new set of requirements around security, compliance, disaster recovery, blah, 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 on and on and on, right? There's this long string of sort of enterprise grade requirements that are coming. And so I think we're going to see those get worked out by the community and by customers in the coming years. And that's going to unblock another set of workloads and use cases again, as we kind of head into that enterprise adoption curve as well.
Awesome. I mean, basically what I want to do before we go to the next question, one of the things when it comes to make it easier and easier for people to use Iceberg is getting data into Iceberg in the first place. So I would like to hear from each of you a little bit about sort of the project that you're working on. Sort of what are you doing to help people get their data into Iceberg? We'll start with you, Robert.
Yeah, so what we do is, what we try to do is, Iceberg REST is, maybe a stupid saying, but it's like the tip of the iceberg. I think we cannot do a lot more with Iceberg, like extending the reach of metadata. Currently it's just like what you have in that metadata JSON thingy, but there's way more data that helps to work with data, to get data in the right format in. And repeating what Paul said, just query that parquet file. That's an extremely, it sounds like a very easy use case, but it's an often asked use case. Like, can we just add these parquet files to our table? Like, these are things that sound very easy, but given that we are living in a world where data, it comes in continuously and like at a very high rate, you have high update rates to tables with these use cases. So that's where things become a bit trickier, and yeah, that's where we want to help solve people.
Okay.
And I think yeah, REST catalog and things like this really help with that.
Okay, Daniel?
So I would say there's probably two areas that I would look to. One is, any company that's starting to build like a event pipeline, collecting large amounts of data, landing it in Iceberg is the most important thing in terms of like getting that initial durability, getting it into a table format that then you can operate on. And that's where like we invested pretty heavily in Iceberg Kafka Connect and building out a really good implementation for that. And that just makes it really easy for anybody who's using a Kafka-style pipeline to land data into Iceberg. But we see across the ecosystem that there's lots of other vendors and tools that are supporting Iceberg syncs. So when you think about the transition from fast-moving data to analytic storage, what you want to do is you want to land it as quickly as possible and make it accessible as quickly as possible. And so I think any of those avenues of like just bringing data into Iceberg is really important. The next piece is more for people who are making a transition from legacy technologies like Hive tables. And we've done some amount of work in the open source to provide procedures to help people migrate from legacy formats to Iceberg. I think that overall there's going to be a need for more of that in the future. We're just going to see more people who want to make that transition, and they need the tooling, they need the support in order to just kind of like automate that or seamlessly move things. It's still a little rough, and for larger corporations that have been running in a Hadoop ecosystem for a long time, that like choosing a table format, choosing a direction forward, that's one piece, but like the migration is much bigger. It's a really hard problem to solve, and sometimes it can take years for companies to do that. So anything that we can do to kind of like help through that process is beneficial to the community as a whole.
Casey, about getting data into Iceberg.
Yeah, you picked a topic or a question I think near and dear to my heart. I mean, this is what gets me up every day. And I break this down into pull-based, push-based loading. So on push, we definitely have Kafka coming, which is amazing. Dremio's continuing to put work into our copy into syntax. Like loading data is one of those interesting things of if you don't have the right parameters in your syntax, you can't load the data, right? You have to go somewhere else to manipulate the data to get it loaded in. So we're continuing to put effort into that to make sure that no matter how your data is landing in your lake, like we can interpret it and we can copy it into an Iceberg table. And that's just a continual effort working with customers, understanding their data, understanding what the requirements are, but continual investments going there. And then something that was announced yesterday in the keynote was our auto ingest capability, right? And so what we've built is an event-driven architecture for AWS. We're also building it for Azure, but you basically subscribe to a directory within S3, and every time a file lands there, you don't even have to think about that data pipeline. We'll automatically pick that file up, write it to a destination Iceberg table. And so it's really about kind of that ease of use and automation where you as a customer aren't having to build and maintain all of these pipes just to get your data into Iceberg, right? If you're using Kafka, you write it directly into Iceberg. If you're doing repeated kind of micro batches of files off of S3 or other cloud storage, like we have you covered there. So your interface now becomes these tables, these table objects, and your analyst can immediately start querying and interacting with data in a meaningful way, as opposed to having to figure out, this goes here and this file goes there and everything else. So that's really kind of a comprehensive view of this, is make sure that we have the standard pull-based models as well as micro-batch, event-driven, and then pushed via Kafka.
Awesome. And Paul?
Well, I talked a little bit about sort of our focus on performance over the course of the last 12 to 18 months to just make S3 faster and more efficient for Iceberg. But, at the end of the day, it's kind of a weird take. In fact, like we kind of see our job is to get out of the way right? Like we really want S3 to just not be a factor, to just provide the performance, the durability, the security that Iceberg needs on top. And executing on those fundamentals, those storage fundamentals, is actually at scale, it's a ton of work. And so that's really our main goal. And I think one of the biggest contributions that we will make to the growth of Iceberg is just making S3 the best place to run these tables and to just get the storage out of the way. So that customers can go do what they want, build the apps that they want without having to think about, how am I laying my stuff out on disk.
Okay, awesome. Now I want to do a quick little lightning round where I'm going to ask you kind of each a different question. So I'm going to start off with Robert. What I'd like to ask you is like sort of beyond just like the REST catalog, what are some other sort of changes that are coming down the pipeline with Nessie that might be interesting to the audience out there?
Actually, a lot of things. Yeah, it's more or less like the smallish things that maybe matter. So for example, we have been neglecting the Nessie CLI quite a bit. I mean, it works and does its thing, but we are coming up with a new thing. We are doing a lot on doing documentation, and we have a lot of plans or a lot of on the roadmap to enhance the documentation and the guides and to help people ramp up with Nessie on Iceberg REST and with REST and with S3 and how things work together. And so basically helping people start working without thinking too much, without running into the kind of, I would keep it short in like the usual issues that people run into. So yeah, basically kind of on the track of just making it just work.
Awesome. And Daniel, so you mentioned a lot about there's more for migration and helping people sort of migrate between formats and into Iceberg. So there's a couple different projects out there that are trying to address like the issue of interoperability with data lake table formats. Particularly, you have Apache Xtable, you have basically the uniform deal. So what would be your take on that, and sort of like what are different features that might exist that otherwise can help people just land in Iceberg and switch over to Iceberg?
I would say, there are a number of technologies out there that are either doing translation or providing Iceberg as kind of an interchange format, exposing data as Iceberg so it can be consumed. And I think that, in some regards, there's likely going to be a future where Iceberg is also an interchange format, for things that need to consume data. If they know how to read Iceberg, as long as you can present it in a way that it's consumable, that's fine. For translation, it's a difficult problem. Like all of these formats, they have different kind of characteristics and behaviors. We want to get to a point where this isn't really a problem for people. If the answer is, hey, if it looks like Iceberg and people can consume it, I think that's a reasonable answer. The challenge, of course, is there's a lot of functional differences. There's a lot of semantic differences, and trying to stitch all of those together in a way that doesn't affect upstream users. Like any data scientist does not want to have to think about this. They probably should not be caring about tables. What they want is like SQL semantics and strong guarantees about their data. And if they're thinking about like, oh, is it, Parquet or Orc or, Avro files, and, what's going to happen when I do the schema evolution, they're kind of thinking about the wrong problem space for what they're doing. Your analyst should be thinking about the data and extracting value out of it. So, ultimately, I think we want to get to a place where, the tools have good integration and you aren't really thinking about this problem. But, for many of those projects, I haven't looked deeply into what they actually do. My focus has primarily been on Iceberg and the capabilities there.
Awesome. And like Casey, talking about like sort of the consumer experience and the customer experience, as you mentioned a few times, sort of what are some of the places where you feel are basically the best edges to smooth out for the customer experience in the Iceberg ecosystem that from the conversations you've had?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the one thing that we've tried to be very upfront about and is challenging for a lot of customers to grasp at first is kind of the safe table operations dynamics of Iceberg. So with serial isolation, making sure that you're not running concurrent DML at the same time and understanding that, I think there's a little bit of education that we could do, a little bit of guarding that we could also do to prevent, concurrent optimizations, one of them from failing their merge. That's one area that we've seen customers struggle with implementing it at scale, and we've provided some guidance and best practices, but it'd be great to bake that into the product or bake that into the spec over time. But it's, again, one of those things that I think early adopters are going to live with, and it's going to be fine. And maybe this is an enterprise capability that we're just starting to see the feedback on. But I think just making sure that we have the concurrency dynamics worked out really well as we operate at scale is going to be particularly important with concurrent writes from multiple engines, and just making sure that that's super robust, super rigid. And I think that's a huge differentiator once we nail that, because it really then will be the table format for any engine. And I don't think that problem has quite been nailed yet, but it is something that we're looking at and kind of working with customers to understand the requirements so that we can drive that to ground.
Awesome. Paul, you mentioned how basically AWS, you're basically constantly driving sort of performance benefits on the S3 layer, so that way it becomes a great layer to land your Iceberg data on for quick access. Can you just tell us about maybe some of the recent innovations at that S3 storage layer level that's helping enable people to use Iceberg better, faster? I'm trying to think of a third word, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, we, over the course of the last few months, we launched a new high-speed storage class called S3 Express. That was a big investment for us. Still early days for that storage class, but we're getting good feedback from customers, good adoption there. We've also done a bunch in open source as well, and we're looking very closely at what contributions we can make to help with in the open source community to kind of help with performance generally. We've done a lot of work on our side in the SDKs, in the AWS SDKs, to help implement S3 sort of performance best practices in code. So that's something that we're looking to get more broadly used in the Iceberg community. And so there's really a bunch of stuff going on, and a bunch of stuff here recently announced as well. Folks can feel free to reach out to me directly if you want to learn more. I'm happy to go through that.
Awesome. So let's start moving on to our final question. Now, as we wrap up, where can people learn more about what you are working on? And are there any other Apache Iceberg related efforts you'd like to highlight quickly? So basically, bottom line is, this is the time to kind of plug the things you want to plug and let people be aware of the cool Apache Iceberg things that they should be aware of, should be checking out, should be excited about. Let's get them pumped. Robert, you first.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Nessie is open source, and we are really committed to open source, and not just open source, but also being open. We don't care which query engine Nessie is using. Nessie works with every query engine that supports Iceberg. We, as open, we propose and discuss changes on Nessie and on the public GitHub Nessie, and also on our Zulip chat. And join us, find us on project.Nessie.org. Everybody is invited to look at Nessie, or even better, contribute code, issues, documentation, or whatever good things. Write about it. TLDR, maybe join the community of people who already wrote and talk about Nessie.
Awesome. So project.Nessie.org. Daniel.
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two pieces I would pitch. The Iceberg community, obviously, there's a Slack channel. It's a really large community. It's a great place to ask questions, to learn what's going on. That covers a wide variety of the topics we've already discussed, including REST and the different language implementations. There's channels for each one of those and people you can connect with. There's also people seeking help and providing help. So you'll find me on there pretty regularly, and happy to answer questions and help people out. On the other side, Tabular is doing a lot of work in terms of the Kafka Connect is something that's going on. And if you're interested in that, there's a channel for it. But we provide a enterprise implementation of the REST catalog. And so if you're interested in what we're working on, take a look at tabular.io, and you can see many of the features and capabilities we're bringing to the Iceberg ecosystem.
Got it. Okay, so if you wanted to join the Iceberg community, you'd go over to the docs at iceberg.apache.org, and then you also mentioned tabular.io to see Tabular. Casey.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo the community. That is the first stop shop for any open standards, making sure that we have a vivid engagement there. So definitely want to jump on that bandwagon and say that is the way to get started. If you're interested in anything from Dremio about SQL Engine or engine on top of Iceberg, you can go to dremio.com. Our blog is coming out with all of these announcements, so you could follow our thought leadership there. And then personally for me, as I ramped up on the space, like anything from Alex on LinkedIn, like I just follow Alex and it's like, man, I am learning so much about what this can do and the possibilities of Iceberg. So I think that's, an amazing resource for the community. Not all communities have Alex's running around doing as much as he does. So just follow him if you haven't yet, and you will learn more about Iceberg than you can imagine.
Got it. Okay, so recap, dremio.com and the dremio.com blog, which is dremio.com/blog, where you'll find most of the stuff that you mentioned that I've written. And then again, follow me on LinkedIn. Just look up my name. But Paul, tell us where we can learn more about AWS.
I mean, there are a bunch of resources out there on AWS. Our website is a wealth of knowledge. In terms of something that I would pitch, I think that, what I love to talk about are those storage fundamentals that the S3 organization wakes up every day to go deliver for customers who are running Iceberg. And, S3 has a very unique architecture that allows it to execute on its promise to deliver 11 nines of durability, a high level of security and the performance that it does under these massive and growing data warehouses. And so we think that it's pretty unique, it's pretty interesting, and we're very passionate about delivering those fundamentals for customers. So I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have. You can find me in Slack, find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Again, I want to just say thank you to our panel. You guys have been amazing. We've gotten to learn so many things about Nessie, about Tabular, about Iceberg and the new Iceberg v3 spec, the REST catalog. We learned about Dremio auto ingest, AWS in this Express tier. So many really exciting things that are going to help you be able to better use Iceberg, better adopt Iceberg. There's so much in this space. And if you want to learn more about Apache Iceberg, make sure to go register for the Apache Iceberg Summit 2024. Again, you can register for that at iceberg-summit.org. And you can scan the QR code that's currently on the screen. Again, organized by Tabular and Dremio with all sorts of great talks. Okay, Dremio's Benny Chao is going to be there talking about reflections, which you've heard me talk a lot about yesterday for those who attended my sessions yesterday. But yeah, definitely check out the event. Again, thank you very much. Again, thank you to our panel for being here and helping us learn more about Iceberg, this really transformational technology that's really allowing basically any data anywhere to be accessible everywhere. Thank you.